During the election campaign, we were sold a bill of goods by Mark Carney. Elbows up. We were going to fight by going in and yelling and screaming and tearing into the US and making sure they understood that Canada will not be messed with. We are a sovereign country. But he never really said that he was going to go in and talk about our history, the things we've contributed to the world. And that's what Pierre Poilievre was saying. Both men took a stance against the United States. Both talked tough against the United States. But one just went in elbows up, yelling and kicking and screaming, fingers up even in his supporter base. And then the other went based on history and what we've provided and how we've been friends to the United States and other countries in the world and how we've contributed to their own past histories and successes and using that as part of our negotiations. So I thought today, why don't we actually take a deeper look into that very theory? Was Pierre Poilievre correct in using that approach instead of the elbows up, yelling, kicking, screaming approach that Mark Carney said he would use? Now, of course, he didn't use it. He fell flat on his face, but we'll talk about that as well. But it turns out in all of this, and in all of this research, Pierre Poilievre was right. Let's go.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
Welcome back to Bakes on Things. I'm Chris Baker. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. As we know, over the last decade, it's like Canada has vanished off the Earth's surface. Mark Carney and his liberal cabal have squandered yet another golden opportunity to show the world that Canada still mattered. They talked about an elbows up Canada, a Canada that stands assertively on the world stage. But when the moment came, they were caught flat-footed, elbows very limp, utterly failing to communicate our nation's immense global importance, both in history and now. It's an unforgivable sin of omission. The evidence was all there the whole time, overwhelming and indisputable, though maybe locked up for the last decade, that a world without Canada would descend into chaos and scarcity. And yet, Carney and company fumbled it again, leaving Canada's story continuously untold and our worth underappreciated. This is not just a political misstep, it's a betrayal of Canada's legacy and its future. And so let's spell it out clearly for Mr. Carney and his timid strategists and those that put Canada last for the last 10 years. Canada is indispensable to this world, though you might not feel like it is over the last decade. If anyone doubts it, let's imagine the alternate reality that experts already explored, an Earth from which Canada suddenly never existed. What would happen? Well, global shockwaves in nearly every domain of human security and prosperity, to be exact. The History Channel's own panel of experts agreed that without Canada's contributions in energy, mining, forestry, and agriculture, the world would be staring at extreme scarcity. Not mild inconvenience, by the way, extreme scarcity. Think of the trade and natural resource shock first that a world without Canada would look like. Canada isn't just some bit player in that. It is a cornerstone of global supply chains. Remove Canadian exports and you rip a gaping hole in the world economy. In oil, Canada ships out over 3 million barrels a day, and in fact, 43% of America's oil imports come from Canada. If we disappeared, nearly half of the fuel supply for America's trucks, planes, and industries would be gone overnight. The United States would wake up to $10 a gallon gas if they could find any of it at all, and an economy in free fall as well. And it's not just oil. 15 million Americans rely on Canadian natural gas to heat their homes in winter. Picture those households shivering in the dark because the Liberals failed to champion the simple fact that without Canadian energy, our southern neighbor literally goes cold. In fact, Doug Ford tried to do this a little bit with electricity, but then he just decided to go on CNN and yell and scream. Carney, where was the message in your talking points, by the way? And energy is just the start. Without Canada, the world's food security takes a hit. Every year, Canada grows and exports enough grain to bake 73 billion loaves of bread. That's 10 loaves of bread for every human being on this planet. Imagine the global famine pressure that would exist if that bread had vanished. Prices would skyrocket from Cairo to Caracas. And countries like China, which counts on Canadian canola and wheat despite the recent tariffs, would face unrest as food supplies tightened. And fertilizer? Well, Canada holds half of the world's potash reserves, the essential nutrient that helps feed billions by fertilizing crops. Remove Canadian potash from the equation, and you get a global agricultural crisis with poorer nations hit hardest as yields drop and prices climb. Did Carney ever once thunder on about this in any of his speeches or any of his meetings in the White House or with China? Did he ever warn Beijing or anyone else that you'd miss us when we're gone? If he did, it was a whisper when the world needed a shout, because we've been missing for the last 10 years. Consider minerals and metals, the building blocks of modern industry and technology. Canada is a leading producer of over 60 different minerals and metals, from things like nickel and copper that go into your electronics to uranium that powers nuclear plants, keeping lights on from France to South Korea. Without Canada's steady supply of these things, industries worldwide would actually sputter. But the world has forgotten about all of this. Prices for everything from cell phones to solar panels would jump. We keep the world's industrial engines running with a stable provisioning of what the world needs in a reliable, safe, and friendly way, as futurist Robert Sawyer put it. That stability, that friendly reliability Canada provides, has been a quiet linchpin of global civilization for decades. And still, our liberal leaders failed to somehow pound that fact home. And that's not great for us. Without Canada, the global power balance teeters and the world becomes a more dangerous place. I'm serious. The Arctic, one of the new frontiers of great power competition, would effectively be surrendered to Russia's whims if Canada's north were absent. Canada is one of only a handful of nations with legitimate Arctic territory and a voice for upholding the rule of law in that region. Take us out, and you invite a free-for-all for Arctic resources and shipping lanes with Putin smiling ear to ear. The United States, our supposed closest ally, and hopefully someday will be again, though you wouldn't know it from how things are going right now, would suddenly find its northern flank exposed without us. Who guards that massive stretch of Arctic and subarctic territory bridging the oceans? We do. Canada does. We are the first line of defense for North America. As security experts flatly note, securing Canada means securing the United States northern flank, because any airborne or maritime threat coming over the pole has to go through our Canadian airspace and waters. Without us, NORAD's radar screens go dark up north, and America is blind to missiles or bombers until they're much closer to their border. Does anyone truly think Washington isn't keenly aware of this? They are, but Canada's been such an embarrassment for the last 10 years, they've forgotten. But of course they are. U.S. generals have openly still said that Canada is critically important to the defense of all of North America. But who has failed to leverage that strategic weight in global forums? Once again, the Liberal Party of Canada, Carney, and all of his gang of thieves. And it's not just about hard military power here. Canada's disappearance would deal a grievous blow to global diplomacy, peacekeeping, and humanitarian efforts. Pierre Poilievre was right. Areas where we once led and which remain part of our identity. Let's not forget it was Canadian leadership under Lester B. Pearson that invented modern United Nations peacekeeping. The very concept of peacekeeping as a force for stability was Canada's gift to the world. Without Canada, the Suez Crisis in 1956 would and could have ignited a wider war. Instead, Pearson's peacekeepers diffused it and earned him a Nobel Prize. Who among the Liberals today even mentions this proud legacy of our country? Under Trudeau and now Carney, Canada's peacekeeping contributions dwindled to almost absolutely nothing, a pathetic shadow of Pearson's era. But the idea of Canada as a global peacekeeper still resonates around the world today if we could just bring it back to the surface. Remove Canada entirely from history, and you remove that shining example of a middle power punching above its weight at broker peace. two-broker peace, I should say. The United Nations itself, founded with Canada as a key architect and founding member, would not have been the same. Would UN forces wear these blue helmets today without Canada? Possibly not. This country mattered deeply in building the post-World War II order of international cooperation. Yet our current leaders barely muster a peep about it and haven't for the last 10 years, since 2015. Consider global humanitarian aid and soft power from our past. Canada has been one of the world's most generous refugee resettlers and disaster responders in the world. When earthquakes strike or famine looms, Canada is there. Haiti, Syria, you name it, contributing funds, supplies, and personnel. Our absence would be felt in lives not saved, refugees with nowhere to go. But beyond aid, think of moral leadership Canada has provided in the past. A century of being seen as a relatively honest broker and voice of conscience. From opposing apartheid early on to championing the landmine ban treaty, it has given Canada a soft power clout far exceeding our population. We consistently rank near the top of global soft power indexes and reputational surveys. The world views Canadians as friendly, trustworthy, and tolerant. And that's where we used to be. These are not trivial nice to haves, by the way. They translate into real influence in the global landscape. The ability to convene, to mediate, to inspire. That's what Canada used to do. When Canada speaks, or used to, reasonable people listened. Without Canada, some of the glue holding together global partnerships would be gone. Who fills that void? In an age of rising authoritarians and distrust, losing one of the few countries almost universally respected, a country that is well regarded for being safe, secure, and respectful of the law and human rights, is no small matter. It leaves the world a poorer and a harsher place if we aren't in it. The cultural and emotional impact of a Canada-less world would cut deep as well. Our liberal leaders have forgotten, or seem to have forgotten, to tell this story anymore. But everyone from Washington to Beijing, from London to Berlin, feels what Canada represents. They've just forgotten too, because our liberal government has been in power for the last 10 years. To our American neighbors, we're more than just another ally. We're family. We share the longest undefended border on earth. We bled side by side on D-Day and in Kandahar, and we fuel each other's economies. The average American might not always realize it, but remove Canada, and they'd sure as hell notice the profound disruption and loss. No Canada means the U.S. loses its best customer. Hundreds of billions of dollars in trade gone. Its most reliable friend in a crisis, too, by the way, and the comforting presence of a friendly giant guarding the northern horizon. The emotional bond, yes, emotional, but because millions of Americans actually have Canadian family, things like parents, grandparents, cousins, would be ripped away if Canada didn't exist. How did Carney fail to evoke any of all of these things? Like, it's really crazy. A real Canadian leader would remind Americans that their security, their prosperity, even family ties are intertwined with Canada's existence, and Pierre Poilievre proposed to do so. Instead, we got arrogance and platitudes. And then there's China. You think Beijing wouldn't feel Canada's loss? Sure, China's a rising superpower that likes to bully us whenever it can, but let's be clear. China has benefited immensely from Canada's contributions to the world. For one, China's food security would be weaker without Canada, and in particular Canadian canola, wheat, and potash, keeping their people fed. Their manufacturers rely on Canadian metals and minerals, and culturally, guess what? The most famous Canadian in China isn't Justin Bieber or Celine Dion. It's Dr. Norman Bethune, a Canadian doctor revered as a hero in Chinese history. They wrote a Chinese essay praising Bethune's selfless spirit, and to this day, Bethune's name is taught to Chinese schoolchildren as an exemplar of international friendship and sacrifice. If you didn't know it, it's because nobody's talked about it since 2015. There's a deep well of goodwill that Canada has in all over the world, including China. Without Canada, that piece of shared history, a symbol that even a North American foreign devil could give his life for the Chinese people, wouldn't exist. China would also lose a significant middle power partner in global institutions, one that, despite our recent frictions, has often acted as a bridge between the East and the West. But do our leaders ever leverage these facts in any kind of negotiation or diplomacy? Do they ever remind China that we supply the uranium for their reactors, the potash for their fields, the inspiration for their medical martyrs? No. They'd rather play the angry games, play defense, and now apologize, it seems. And our supposed allies in Europe, the UK, France, Germany, and others, would they feel our loss? Absolutely. The United Kingdom remembers that in its darkest hours of the 20th century, Canadians stood by them. In World War I at Vimy Ridge, Canadian soldiers accomplished in days what other armies couldn't in months, a victory that British historians mark as pivotal. In World War II, Canada was effectively Britain's arsenal and farm when they were under siege. We fed them, armed them, trained their pilots. By war's end, Canada had built the third largest navy in the world to guard the Atlantic convoys, and a Royal Canadian Air Force group was bombing Nazi Germany alongside the Royal Air Force. Churchill himself acknowledged that without Canada's contributions, victory would have come at a much greater cost, if at all. If Canada weren't there, how many more British and American sons would have died at sea from U-boat torpedoes that our Navy prevented? How much longer would the Blitz have lasted without Canadian food and material keeping Britain in the fight? These are profoundly emotional memories ingrained in the UK's consciousness, but forgotten by the world because of our liberal governments. And beyond wartime, Britain and Canada are entwined by culture and blood. The Queen, now King, on our currency, the shared language and values, countless Brits who have family here in Canada and vice versa. A world without Canada is for the British like losing a dear sibling, and it hurts. Yet, did our liberal leaders ever capitalize on any of this goodwill in their negotiations? Did Carney evoke Juno Beach or Kandahar or the loyalty of a century in his appeals to allies? Not that anyone heard. France and Germany, too. They would be poor without Canada, strategically and emotionally. France considers Canada, especially Quebec, as part of its extended Francophone family. Canadian soldiers died liberating French soil twice in 30 years last century. There are French towns that to this day fly Canadian flags in remembrance. Canadian peacekeepers and diplomats have supported French interests in places like Haiti and Mali, amplifying France's efforts to stabilize those regions. Remove Canada, and France loses a key partner in La Francophonie, a bridge between Europe and the Americas, and one of the champions of the Paris Agreement on climate. Indeed, Canada has often been a crucial voice in climate negotiations. Recall that the Montreal Protocol of 1987 was one of the biggest, which literally saved the world's ozone layer. It bears the name of a Canadian city and was achieved in part through Canada-US leadership and cooperation. How amazing is that? Does the Carney government ever bring that up in negotiations? See, we're not selling ourselves to the world anymore. That treaty itself, by the way, eliminated 99% of ozone depleting chemicals and prevented millions of cases of skin cancer worldwide. Think about that for a second. Millions around the globe are alive and healthy today because of a Canadian-led environmental accord. Without Canada, does that deal even happen? Perhaps not, at least not in time to prevent catastrophe. So, to President Macron and every French person who enjoys not getting fried by UV rays or wants action on climate change, Canada's contributions have been literally life-saving. And Germany, well, they may not have the same Commonwealth ties, but they certainly value Canada as a stalwart NATO ally. Canada leads the NATO battle group in Latvia, standing with German troops to deter Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. Canadians training Ukrainian soldiers have helped blunt Putin's invasion, which indirectly secures Europe. Economically, Germany hungers for reliable sources of energy after learning the hard way about over reliance on Russian gas. Canada's LNG and hydrogen potential is stuck in the ground, and the potential looms large for places like Germany. Culturally, Germans admire Canada's successful multicultural society, something Germans have been striving for, and love to vacation in our Rockies and cities. So, yes, if Canada vanished, Germans would feel a personal loss too. A trusted ally gone, a model democracy and immigration success story gone, a friendly destination gone. And it's kind of felt like that since 2015. The world would be poorer, more dangerous, and less stable across the board. This isn't maple flavored patriotism, folks. These are facts that were documented and acknowledged globally before 2015. And now no one respects us anymore. From elbows up, we're looking like fools. So, with all that evidence, all that raw ammunition, all at their disposal, what did Mark Carney and the Liberal Party do over the last 10 years, including Justin Trudeau? Nothing of substance. They completely missed the moment. Instead of proudly banging the drum about Canada's worth, Carney has delivered milquetoast messages and half-hearted platitudes in all of his negotiations. The so called elbows up movement, which briefly lit a fire under Canadians' pride, has fizzled into an elbows limp capitulation under this leadership. The Liberals rode a wave of public sentiment that Canada should stand up for itself, inspired by everything from hockey ethos to trade battles, and they utterly failed to embody it whatsoever. Mike Myers, a comedian for heaven's sake, did more to popularize elbows up by cheekily mouthing it on SNL than Carney did with all his speeches. Trudeau gave a farewell speech declaring elbows up as a national stance. But what really ever came after it? Nothing. There's been no progress. And in fact, we've been set back with 75% tariffs now on canola. Carney was supposed to carry that torch to show the world a more assertive Canada. Yet under his watch, it's been all retreat and no roar. Carney, with his golden international resume as former central banker, was expected to be a visionary statesman. Instead, he's governed like a technocrat afraid of his own shadow. Where is the bold agenda to make Canada an energy superpower and climate leader, to seize the narrative that our oil and gas, produced under strict environmental and humanitarian rights, by the way, is actually a global good compared to blood-stained alternatives? He flirted with it, promising to build, baby build, and make Canada an energy superpower. But when push came to shove, he folded. Domestic pipeline projects still languish uncompleted, or they get bogged down in interminable reviews while our allies begged for Canadian LNG to replace Russian gas. Carney's government has delivered no new energy infrastructure of any significance whatsoever, just grandstanding and slogans, and we'll get to it. The result? We leave money on the table, our allies in the lurch, and let autocrats like Putin fill the void. This was the moment to elbow past the naysayers and assert that Canadian oil can help keep the lights on in the free world while we innovate in renewables. But no, Carney dropped that ball so badly, even the Independent Institute mocked his approach as elbows down diplomacy, literally a quote. They observed that Canada's path to energy and budget reform has, and I quote, stalled amid mounting trade tensions and parliamentary inaction. No budget, no tax reform, no clarity, just soaring debt and grandstanding, unquote. Soaring debt and grandstanding. That should be the Liberal Party's new slogan. He had the chance, ample chance, to leverage Canada's trade heft in negotiations and stand up to bullies, whether it's Trump's tariffs or China's coercive hostage diplomacy, and instead he cozied up to Doug Ford at his cottage. Sure, the Liberals talked a good game in ads. Who can forget the awkward image of Carney and Mike Myers in a campaign ad, elbows literally flying through the air? But a viral ad or two is worthless if you don't back it up with a real spine in office. When President Trump slapped punishing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, where was Carney's fury? That fury never materialized. We got tepid protests and a quick return to business as usual, or we'll just deal with ourselves. The Elbows Up movement had people ready to boycott American goods, put tariffs on U.S. exports from Trump country, essentially to fight back. And indeed, Trudeau's government initially retaliated with counter tariffs, but under Carney and under his leadership, they rolled that back. That fighting spirit dissipated. Reports even emerged of behind the scenes panic in Ottawa about rocking the boat too much. So much for standing firm. Even Pierre Poilievre showed more populist fight in those moments than our Liberal government, and he hasn't even been in Parliament, aligning with the anger of ordinary Canadians at being bullied. Carney, ever the Davos man, seemed uncomfortable actually scrapping on our behalf, on Canada's behalf. The result, Canada once again got painted as the polite wallflower, easily shoved aside. Elbows up became, please don't hit us. It's pathetic. On the world stage, Carney has been equally invisible. He continuously goes on vacation. He's on one this week. One might have expected him to barnstorm foreign capitals, armed with the findings of that World Without Canada study that was done, because that's where some of my stuff has come from today, to hammer into the heads of allies and adversaries alike just how much they need Canada. Instead, we got polite, forgettable speeches. He should have gone to Washington and reminded Congress that without Canada, their economy and national security would face profound disruption, as even their own think tanks acknowledge. He should have stood at the UN and recounted in vivid detail what happens in those dramatizations, the global famine, the conflict, the environmental collapse that ensues in a world without the stabilizing hand of Canada. Imagine the moral authority of that message, not boasting, but warning. You all take us for granted at your own peril. But no, such a global clarion call never came. Maybe Carney thought it was implied or that it would sound too boastful. Too boastful? This from a man leading a country that, if anything, suffers from chronic humility. We needed boastful. We earned it through a century of contributions. We earned respect that we should have today. Yet Carney and the Liberals over the last decade have acted like Canada's value is just a given footnote, not worth trumpeting. It's diplomatic malpractice to do so. Even on climate, where Carney likes to preen as a green finance guru, where was the celebration of Canadian climate leadership? Sure, Carney talks about carbon markets and net zero plans all the time. He drones on about it. But did he ever remind the world that the Montreal Protocol, the blueprint for effective climate action in modern day history, was a Canadian triumph that literally prevented half a degree of warming by century's end? Something the carbon tax, by the way, never even got close to doing. That we led in saving the ozone layer, proving global agreements can work? No, because that would require giving credit to past Canadian leadership, and in particular under a progressive conservative prime minister, no less. And it also might raise uncomfortable comparisons to our current lackluster efforts as well. He can't even sell our positives properly. And when it comes to our failures, like falling short of NATO defense spending, for example, Carney hasn't turned those around either. He's made promises, that's it. He had a mandate to beef up our military and get serious about Arctic defense, especially with renewed threats from Russia. But it's still the same old story. Procurement disasters, little to show, and the U.S. openly frustrated at our freeloading. How does that square with elbows up? It doesn't. It screams head in the sand. In fact, the new Speaker of the House in the U.S. lambasted Canada for riding America's coattails on defense. That embarrassing rebuke happened under Carney's watch. Ultimately, Mark Carney and the Liberal Party have utterly failed to tell Canada's story or live up to it for that matter. They had in their hands one of the most compelling narratives any nation could ask for, a narrative backed by hard facts and global respect, a narrative that Canada is not just some polite observer of world affairs, but a linchpin without which the world would be poorer, hungrier, colder, darker, more chaotic. The Liberals could have owned that narrative, run with it, made it the core of Canada's foreign policy and national brand. Instead, though, they let it languish, only helped Ukraine. Their leadership has been timid, reactive, and devoid of the passion required to assert Canada's value globally. The Elbows Up movement was supposed to herald a new era of Canadian swagger, not an ugly, boastful nationalism, but a confident, constructive assertiveness that forces the world to take note. But it's a dirty hockey move anyway. Carney was entrusted with this momentum, and he dropped the puck, letting the whole play collapse. It's caustic irony. A guy celebrated on Bay Street and Wall Street for his communication skills and vision couldn't communicate our nation's worth when it counted. Instead of elbows up in the corners, fighting for every inch of respect, Carney's Liberals, they've played a soft game, hugging the boards and hoping not to get checked. Well, they got Canada checked all right. Canada's global relevance has taken the hit. This is not just a rhetorical critique. It's born out of outcomes. Canada's influence in world affairs is waning when it should be waxing. We lost a bid for a UN Security Council seat again. Our share of world trade is stagnant or shrinking dramatically as we miss deals and foreign investment opportunity flees. Our allies have started to question our reliability. Just look at the pointed remarks from US and NATO officials about our military inaction. And hostile powers seeking our meek posture are exploiting it. China detaining our citizens, Russia dumping propaganda, India disrespecting our sovereignty altogether. Why? Because Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau, and the Liberals have failed over the last decade to protect strength or to project strength or articulate why Canada is so damn important to the world. When you don't define your value, others will define it for you, and they'll undervalue it every single time. So, to bring a summary to this, Mark Carney and the Liberal leadership have abdicated their responsibility to champion Canada's role in the world. They have all the facts, some of which I've laid out here, and which Carney's own advisors surely would know about how the world would be less without us. But knowing isn't enough. You have to shout it from the rooftops and act like you actually believe it. Leadership means telling the story of your people in a way that commands respect and attention. On that score, Carney has been an intellectual lightweight and an emotional vacuum. Where has the fire been in the belly? Where was the clarity of purpose? It's just not there. And so the world goes on, largely oblivious to Canada's true impact, and certainly not crediting Canada nearly enough, because our leaders couldn't be bothered to educate or inspire them and their new generations of politicians. Well, I'm bothered. Every Canadian should be. We should be furious that our country's immense contributions to this world and potential are being undersold by the very people elected to amplify them this way in the first place. The next time Carney or any liberal talking head dares to pose with their elbows up, remember this fiasco. It's poser behavior, not genuine conviction. They had a chance to seize a global spotlight and assert our nation's relevance with pride and evidence, and they blew it. A world without Canada would be profoundly worse, less secure, less prosperous, less just, and less free. And that is the story our leaders needed to tell, but they failed. And until we have leadership that finds its backbone and voice, Canada will continue to look like the greatest country in the world that keeps being taken for granted. That, my friends, is not just a political failure, it's a damn tragedy. And that, Mark Carney and his Liberals will wear as their legacy of shame. Canada matters. It's high time our leaders acted like it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Thanks for watching Bakes on Things. I want to hear your thoughts in the discussion. Has Canada disappeared over the last 10 years? And have everyone in the world forgotten who we are? We'll catch you tomorrow.